Gary Rossington, Allan Collins, Ed King, and Steve Gaines were all great guitarists. What they accomplished as individuals, songwriting and performing, was outstanding. But the key to making Lynyrd Skynyrd the iconic band of the 70s was how they worked together to create songs and a sound like no other. This video is not going to be a case of who was the best guitarist in Lynyrd Skynyrd, but how these guys performed, took the best of their talents, molded it all into one, and created some of the greatest songs and sounds in the history of rock, or southern rock music, or however you want to label Lynyrd Skynyrd's genre. Gary and Allan were there from the beginning. Ed was brought in a little later, and when he left in late 1975, Steve Gaines stepped in to replace Ed in '76. But it was these four guitarists who played a major role in creating the legendary sound of Lynyrd Skynyrd. Of course, they were all very good individually, but what was the secrets that caused them to work so well together and create that distinctive sound? Well, I've got my theories, as I'm sure many of you do too. So let's jump right in and see what we can agree or disagree on. First off, I think one of the most overlooked talents of all four of these guitarists was they were all fantastic rhythm guitar players. And I don't mean that in the sense of just strumming chords. I'm talking about grinding out a groove on an electric guitar. Sadly, we only got one studio album with Steve Gaines on it, but between that and taking over for Ed and playing on the live album with only about a month or so to get ready shows that Steve had the same quality of being able to carry a song playing rhythm along with the others. All four guitarists could solo and play slide, of course. But I really think those rhythm parts blended together, live or in the studio, was something you just don't find every day out of three guitarists all playing at the same time. As I said, Steve Gaines only had about a year and a half with the group before he was killed, along with his sister Cassie and the group's leader and frontman Ronnie Van Zant in the 1977 plane crash. But there is no doubt he left his guitar sounds all over that final album, titled Street Survivors. What's even more impressive to me than that was the One More from the Road live album, which was recorded in 1976. And Steve had just a little over a month to get ready for this. His abilities to fit in shine all over that album. He picked up where Ed King left off and did a fantastic job of keeping the great three-guitar steamroller going. I expect we'll all be in Steve's shadow one day. This kid is a writing and playing fool. He's already scared everybody in the band into playing their best in years. Those were the words of Ronnie Van Zant. And from what his other bandmates had to say about him, the praise that Ronnie gave to Steve Gaines was very well earned and deserved. After Ed left, the band sort of cruised along in party mode. Not saying they weren't performing well, maybe they were just too comfortable and needed a kick in the hind end to step it up a bit. And that kick came in the form of Steve Gaines. He was a very talented guitarist, vocalist, and songwriter that made the other six members sit up and take notice. He had a great future ahead of him in music. As an individual, he was very talented, but he also had that special something that let him step right up in between Allan Collins and Gary Rossington, where Ed King had been, and kept the Skynyrd sound going. The proof is in that live album, as Ed King was no easy act to follow. Ed King will always be known as the guitarist who created the iconic guitar riff introing Sweet Home Alabama, but he was much more than that. Starting out as the bass player at first, Ed took over those duties when Leon Wilkeson had left the band and took a day job at an ice cream factory. Ed did a decent job on bass, but Ronnie made the decision to move Ed to guitar and get Leon back in the band to take over the bass guitar duties. So at that time, Ed, who had played guitar in the psychedelic rock band Strawberry Alarm Clock, owned an early 70s Les Paul Deluxe and decided if he was going to play guitar in the band, he needed to get a different sound, as Allan Collins and Gary Rossington were both playing Gibsons, Allan a Firebird and Gary a Les Paul. So Ed took that Les Paul and traded it in on a new Fender Stratocaster. This would be the guitar he would write that iconic opening riff to Sweet Home Alabama on, which Ed says was written the first day back at practice with Leon on bass. Now here's Ed's take on the three-guitar band. He said, "I think the three guitars, all being different, helped. We weren't really that great of musicians, but we worked real well together. There was a great chemistry. Live, people really picked up on that. We really enjoyed playing together." Now I have to say something here before we move on to the other two guitarists. And this is about my feelings on Ronnie Van Zant. I've always thought Ronnie could write lyrics as good as Chris Christopherson and phrase them like Merle Haggard. Ronnie Van Zant was one of the greatest songwriters of the 1970s, and I don't think he ever gets enough credit for that. I guess maybe his stage persona overshadowed it. I don't know. Now, Ronnie didn't play an instrument when writing songs. Ed King said he'd sit on the edge of the couch at the Hell House practice space, pretty much with his head in his hands. He never wrote anything down, ever. So we'd work real hard to make sure we remembered the groove of the song, how it felt, and the changes. Because if you came back the next day and couldn't play it with exactly the same feel, there was a good chance the song was lost. So this is another reason why these guitarists were so important to those Skynyrd songs. Ed ended this by stating, Ronnie wrote his syllables so that they fit inside the groove. As I said, Ronnie could phrase like Merle Haggard, except he phrased his around the electric guitars. And many of those early songs were around the sounds created by Allan Collins and Gary Rossington. Allan Collins will always be known for his ripping solo on the end of Freebird, but if you pay attention to his background play, he had a very unique style of holding down the rhythm section. Allan never had any guitar lessons, so to speak, just picked up things here and there, but he was a natural, and it wasn't long before he was playing well enough to form a band. Then a year or so later, he was to hook up with Ronnie Van Zant and Gary Rossington, and along with drummer Bob Burns and bassist Larry Junstrom, formed a group that had a few different names, such as My Backyard, The Noble Five, and The 1%, before finally calling themselves Lynyrd Skynyrd around 1969. Allan, along with Ronnie Van Zant, was to be credited with writing 3 of the 8 songs on Skynyrd's first album, called the Pronounced Album. The songs were Tuesday's Gone, Gimme 3 Steps, and Freebird. Allan would go on to write the music for many more great Skynyrd songs. Now there is one song from the very early years I think you should give a listen to, as not many know about this one, titled Need All My Friends. It was written by Ronnie and Allan Collins. If you listen to this song, you feel the roots of Lynyrd Skynyrd starting to take hold. Listen closely to the rhythm going on in it. I'm going to leave a link in the description section to a recording of this song. If you've never heard it and are a Skynyrd fan, take my advice and check it out. Although the recording and the mix isn't great, you can still hear Allan and Gary doing a great job getting that Skynyrd feel on the guitars. Gary Rossington will always be known for his slide work on Freebird. He is also credited, along with Ronnie, for writing 3 of the 8 songs on the Pronounced album, I Ain't the One, Things Going On, and Simple Man. Speaking of which, wasn't a favorite of producer Al Kooper. During the recording, Kooper didn't think much of the song Gary and Ronnie had written called Simple Man, and said it wasn't very good and didn't want to waste time on it. Legend has it, Ronnie Van Zant took Kooper outside and told him if he didn't like the song, he could just stay out there until it was recorded. Ronnie walked back in the studio and the band laid down the Skynyrd classic. Here's what Gary had to say about the writing and recording of Freebird. Around 1970, when we wrote the song, I had just started playing slide. Allan had these chords, but Ronnie couldn't figure out any melody or lyrics to go with them. We kept playing the chords over and over until Ronnie figured out some lyrics and I came up with the slide part. But when I played, the bottle kept clinking against the frets because the strings were too low. I took a screwdriver of all things and stuck it under the strings up at the nut so it would raise the strings up like a steel guitar. Then I tuned the B string down to G. So the G and B strings were both tuned to G. With the two G's, it created a drawling double sound. He says he still sticks something under the strings to this day when he plays the song live. Not because he had to, just because he wants to. Gary was to write many, many more Skynyrd classics. Actually, all of these guitarists have left their fingerprints all over these songs. Just because their names aren't on the writing credits doesn't mean they weren't involved in the writing and putting the song together. All of them were so very important in laying down the music and feel which gave Ronnie Van Zant the vehicle he needed to create and tell us stories in the form of all these great songs. Here's a couple more videos you might enjoy if you like this one. I have quite a few on most all members of Lynyrd Skynyrd and many of your favorite musicians and vocalists from the 70s and 80s right here on the channel. So subscribe and check them all out when you get a chance. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate it.